Okay. So, Alex, this is a time for some reflections on the creative process, because I'm retiring from my department job after 35 years in a few months' time, and reassembling all my materials in this barn here, and also thinking about what to do with the rest of my productive life. And in this moment of assessment, it's nice to have a chance to see where I've got to, and also to try and explain to myself and maybe others how one can encourage some kind of creativity and discovery in one's life as an academic. I will take first you and anyone else who sees this through just a few of the things I produced to show that maybe the quality is disputable, but certainly the quantity is quite considerable of what, with the help of my wife Sarah, who's working across from me here, I managed to do in my academic life. Most academics, from my experience, historians, anthropologists and social scientists, produce 3 or 4 books in there before they retire, and I'm just hoping to publish my 18th book shortly. So quantity-wise, it's a lot. And people say, can you give us a few tips? Well, I'm not sure these are tips exactly, but this is what I do. I started writing a PhD or DPhil at Oxford in the 1960s under Keith Thomas, and this was on English witchcraft in Tudor and Stuart England, and that was very heavily influenced by anthropology. My examiner was Evans Pritchard, and this book was duly published in 1970 as Witchcraft in Tudor and Stuart England. So that was my first experience of writing. What I developed there was a technique of what I and many others are called, Beatrice Webb calls one fact, one card, breaking information into small bits and reassembling it, indexing books and so on. And also what I was trying to do there was to bring together different disciplines, anthropology and history, anthropological questions, historical documents. And so this was the first Oxford thesis, I think, which had the word sociology in its subtitle, a sociological analysis. And in the same year, I published a book called The Family Life of Ralph Jocelyn, and that explicitly says in the subtitle, an essay in historical anthropology. So again, it was taking anthropological questions and applying them to the life of a 17th century English clergyman. On the basis of that, I got a research fellowship at Cambridge, and since then I've been here. And a bit later, after I'd done fieldwork in the Himalayas in the mid-70s, I published Resources and Population, a study of the Gurungs of Nepal, which was published with CUP, and that is my second doctoral thesis. Mechanical and really painting by numbers, so to speak, or writing by numbers. I was solid, empirical, breaking the data down, thinking about every paragraph. Then on the 7th of the 7th, 1977, I started a short article, which was the first time that I wrote much more fluidly and intuitively. I just started writing, and during that sabbatical I wrote what I think probably is my most influential book, The Origins of English Individualism, which came out the following year. And this was the first time I'd experienced, since you're interested in shamanism, a kind of shamanic experience. In other words, as I say at the beginning of the book, I didn't write this book wrote me, kind of Zen kind of theory. In other words, it was free writing, and as I was writing I was exploring and discovering new things, so that the book I produced at the end overthrew everything I had thought and believed when I started it some 2 or 3 months later. So that was a transformation both of my life and my writing. From then on, I produced other books, some of them of the old style of very thorough, I can't even see, oh yes, here we are, thorough sort of empirical, detailed research kind, like Marriage and Love in England. Some of them follow up of that. Oh yes, and The Culture of Capitalism, which is a follow-up of the Individualism book. And so it went on, simultaneously with my wife developing filming methods, computer databases, running the Department of Social Anthropology and other small hobbies, getting involved in administration and teaching. Then in the 1993 I started on an entirely new venture. One thing I learnt from my work is that you should not get stuck in a particular groove. It's called the oasis trap among cognitive psychologists. In other words, you get in a rich oasis and it's very difficult to break out into a new area. The cost and the danger and the risk is rather high. But I was arrogant enough and young enough to think that I would start on a new theme, which was the origins of the modern world. This has really always been my interest, but I would look at this through a series. I hadn't really worked it out, of course, in advance, but this turned into a sort of trilogy. The first was The Savage Wars of Peace. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill up the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease, as Kipling put it. And this is a study of the demographic and material origins of the modern world in Japan and England, and in some ways my most difficult book, because I had to learn a lot about Japanese history and demography and medicine and all sorts of things there. So that was the first, and then the second in the trilogy was To Stand on the Shoulders of Giants, which was to look at three great thinkers. It's the riddle of the modern world of liberty, wealth and equality, and it's a study of Montesquieu, Adam Smith and de Tocqueville, and also Ernest Gellner at the end. And this was to see how these great thinkers, who had philosophically looked at world history, had worked out the modern world emerged, the Enlightenment vision of that. The original had two more thinkers, but the publisher balked at the length of this, so I cut that out and put the two other thinkers, the legal historian F.W. Maitland and Fukuzawa, the Japanese philosopher, in another book, The Making of the Modern World. So this trilogy came out like that, exploring, as always, things I really didn't know anything about, i.e. political philosophy. I haven't done much of this since I was at university. Then I was working all this time with a very dear friend, Jerry Martin, and Jerry was keen that my work didn't remain in this rather heavy academic fold, so we, with the encouragement of Sarah, thought we would try and write some rather more popular books. And with Jerry I wrote the first of them. Sarah suggested we took glass as the theme, and this is The Glass Bathyscaphe, which is how glass changed the world, which was a study in science and technology and art and aesthetics, and written with Jerry, because he knew a lot about the scientific, technological side of it. That was the first of a series of more general popular books. Jerry also, he suggested that we did this, and at the time my mother, with whom I've worked on many different topics, I was approached by a publisher to write a book about tea, so I suggested my mother did this with me. So we wrote a book, Green Gold, The Empire of Tea, or History of the Plant That Took Over the World, which is a study in imperialism, in colonialism, in consumer anthropology and all sorts of things like that. So we produced that, and then Jerry beginning to pall at all these different books, and I've left out a number, on of technical ones, reconstructing historical communities and so on, said, couldn't I pull it all together into one book so that people could just read one book with all the other books in it? So I wrote a book to my granddaughter Lily in a form of 30 letters about how the world works, and these last books were following the individualism theme of just sitting and writing from the top of my head and then enriching them. So they're really letters to the world. That then led on to an attempt to try and bring together all the work Sarah and I had done in Japan over 15 years into one book, which ended up as Japan Through the Looking Glass, which was again semi-autobiographical and written quickly, and having done lots of earlier drafts which really didn't work, it finally came together. And that has then led on to the book that will be coming out in the autumn on Cambridge, Reflections on Cambridge. Now those are some of the books, and there are others as well. The question people ask me is, most people find it very difficult to write, and they find it particularly difficult to find new things to say about the world. Is there anything about your life or the way you work which would be helpful to understand in assessing your work, or in us doing the same sort of thing? I put on the web a short talk for one of my PhD students on actually how you write, the process of writing. So here I want to just talk about the setting, the ambiance, because very early on, studying the lives of writers and thinkers, it was clear that we are very blinkered. We can only see a tiny amount, and what we can see is very much constrained by what is around us. If it's difficult to find, for example, a book which you're looking for, and it takes 2 minutes or 3 minutes rather than half a minute, you won't bother. Or if, when you have a good idea and you want to follow it up, it takes a day or two to get to the source, you may forget it or you may lose track. Particularly this is the case for academics, because they have to often squeeze their writing in. They have a morning here, a week there, and their environment will make the difference between doing something productive and unproductive. Also, I've always believed that it's necessary to have a quiet environment which encourages your mind to move outside itself. This is why I particularly like this barn here, because it has very high ceilings. It has a kind of mysterious feeling of an alchemist's cell, and I fill it with all sorts of objects from around the world. So it feels as if it's a sort of thinking, it's what I call a kind of time and space machine. I feel in here that I can go anywhere I like in the world, and of course with the web now it's even more exciting. And so with Sarah, over the years, from very early on, I think I started doing this in my bedroom when I was about 16, I started to try and create a kind of world around me of paper, books, ideas, pictures, inspirations, and this is the final summation of it in this barn. The idea really is that here, where I'm sitting with a beautiful view out of the window, and across from Sarah, with whom I work, is the place where the hard work of revising, improving, and perhaps some of the writing is done. I sit, hopefully, on a swivel chair, and in theory I can lean round and more or less reach all the things I'm working on. I keep the current books I'm working on close at hand. I keep my favourite authors as an inspiration up above me, like Durkheim and Marx and Tocqueville and Weber and so on. Actually, I shouldn't have mentioned Durkheim there, but anyway, he is up here. So inspirational books here, and other things just close enough, so theoretically I just need to get up and pick something off the shelves. I also, for many years, as I mentioned, put information on small slips, and when I started writing I would lay out all the slips and look at the quotations and so on, a method I learnt from friends in Oxford, Brian Harrison and Keith Thomas, among others. So I could just sit here, think, and then find what I wanted, follow trails and whatever. So this is the hub of this world, but it's only a small part of it. And what I would like to do is just to take you around a few other parts, show you around the library, which is very important. In fact, 2 libraries we have, different ones, and just because still an academic, certainly in the arts and humanities and social sciences, needs books. And Sarah and I have been book collectors for many years, and we have unusual books, the usual books you'll find in bookshops and in libraries, but you won't find them assembled in this particular pattern, and many of the books would be difficult to find unless you knew about them. So I'll just take you on a little tour of this area, and then we'll have a look at some of the other places which I use to think in. Okay? So I'll just take you for a 5-minute walk around here. The computers and the writing and so on here, files and everything around. All around the bottom of the barn, most of it is, at least along here, are large folders. These are current things I'm working on, books and articles and things. One thing I learnt from Jack Goody, and in particular, was that you should work on several things at the same time. If you just have all your work concentrated on one book or one article and you get stuck, you're really stuck. So I have a number of books and articles in process. It's more like a ship builder's yard with ships in different stages of construction, and those are all along underneath here at the bottom, and then the books higher up, obviously divided for finding them in some sort of subject order. The ones hopefully that I use a lot nearer the bottom. This starts with philosophy and sociology and continues like that. These are favourite authors: Robert Lowy, demographers, Malthus, Adam Smith, so on here, and then some more anthropology and other topics up there. My favourite authors and medieval history here, history and philosophy of science up there. Round over on the far side over there, and those are diaries, letters, autobiographies. Perhaps we'll just go around, walk over there. Sarah and I edited a 17th century clergyman's diary, so I've always been interested in autobiographical material, so this is quite a nice collection of letters, autobiographies, and diaries, mainly English here. This all along here, and it'll be increased, is Asia, the other area I work on as well as England. This is Japan, China, Nepal, India, and things like that. And then oversized books down here. Of course, it's very difficult. It's as you increase the size of a library, it becomes more and more difficult to find things, and it now does take me some time. But the fact that Sarah has put all my books into an index at least means I know I've got the book, which is a great comfort when you're searching for books. So I know that it's there, and after a little bit of time I can usually find it. And they all have my stickers in, and some of them are indexed into the database and some of them are not. So this is Asia, illustrated books, and the books I'm working on for my current collection. I knew of a historian who used to have, he only had 3 bookshelves. It was a man called Dom David Knowles, who was a famous medievalist. He would write a book, and then when he'd finished the book, he would sell all the books on the 3 shelves and fill up 3 new shelves and write a new book. I'm afraid I can't do that, so what I do is to bring together, these are all books on Cambridge, which I'm working on at the moment, and in a week or 2 when the Cambridge book is finished, I'll take these and put them up on the shelves, and then my next venture will no doubt fill up the shelves again. And these are illustrated, large illustrated books here. Watch the step there. In the old days, it was wonderful to have the whole of the British Library catalogue, the biggest library in Europe. This is the shrunken catalogue of the British Library. Now, of course, it's all online, so you don't need it there. Over here, I've gone into a lot of filmmaking with Sarah, so this is our filmmaking setup, where we compress and Eliot and digitize films, different formats over the years. So we make many films along this side here. Along there are all my early field notes from my work in Nepal in 1969. Objects, I mentioned that I collect all sorts of objects. These are associational objects people have given me over the years, so each of them, if I think about it at all, carries a significance. I see one that has fallen over, so this is from my field work in Nepal, so it has to be put up there. But early objects from Burma and teapots, strange teapots, and things from my supervisor and so on. A lot of the furniture has associations. This was owned by the second professor of anthropology in Cambridge, J.H. Hutton, and came from Assam, where he did his field work. So objects here, and then along here, this is mainly history, economic and social history, religious history, political history, and then these are quite a good collection of sources, original sources, Milton's paper, writings, Wood's Life and Times, all sorts of sources for 16th, 17th, 18th century European history, novels, the works of Boswell and Johnson and those sorts of things. And then more history here. Then along the back, world history, people I again like very much, Hippolyte Taine, Montaigne, Herbert Spencer, great German philosophers and sociologists, Marx and so on, books on sources, books about how you find things, books on humour, detective stories, literature, and this is all law here. So this is one set. If you follow me, the art of discovery is largely summarized by the famous definition of Darwinian selection, which is random variation and selective retention. The variation has to be huge. You need a huge amount of variation, many different sources of inspiration, and randomly to go through this, and then selectively to take bits out and link them together. And the more serendipitous, in other words, the more unexpected, very often I'm just going along and I pick up, Rewards and Fairies, Rudyard Kipling, let's have a look at that. And suddenly you see a picture, or you start reading something, or Edward Thomas's selected poems and prose. These are just things that Sarah's indexing. And suddenly something clicks and you go off in a new direction. But it can't be anticipated, and the more catastrophe theory, Spinoza, Kant, Hobbes, Hume, someone with a liking for Scottish political philosophy there. This as can be seen as a pottery, and it does actually express something which is important in my work, which is that always my wife and I have liked the idea of having intellectual work going alongside craft work, people making things with their hands, trying to change the physical material world. Academics can get very isolated just in their minds. And so for a long time this was a bindery, a book bindery, and the bookbinder left, and now it's a pottery with our son-in-law, Matthew Blakely, which is a very important and interesting pottery. and is an extension of our world. This is a part of the pottery, and there are bits you'll see in the wood. So we really like the idea of people moulding the world physically alongside us moulding the world intellectually. One thing that works for me is to kind of reverse time by keeping as much materials of various generations of my life and thought as possible. I've been a hoarder of paper since I was a boy, and we'll see some of the effects of that upstairs. But also, for the last more than 30 years, my wife and I have kept diaries, and these are the diaries here, which are a way of keeping an account of your everyday doings, and are quite interesting in themselves, and also help you to reflect. And I'll just show you one thing that is also, I'll bring it through here, okay, which I recommend to people, which is, I started a little late, which is really a kind of thoughts book, where every few months you, usually I date it and say, Thoughts in Repose, the 24th of August 1988, after 3 days of just sitting in the barn and reading, the most interesting provocative book by Roger Keating, excellent, have realised, A, what a treadmill we've got into, how lovely it is to be surrounded by books, peace and no responsibilities, because this is the beginning of the vacations, how parched my mind is for ideas, theories. Haven't read a good book for ages and feel very out of touch, both in history and anthropology. So you sort of talk to yourself in these books, and you work out what you're going to be doing by age 50, what I've achieved, what I hope to achieve, plans of space, of the barn, new projects, old projects. So you take stock, so to speak, every few months or so. And that, I think, is an extremely good exercise for any academic or thinker to do that sort of thing. And it's interesting, again, to look back over it and see where you went wrong or where you went right, or what, and so on. So you can here well, some of these are folders of our trips abroad. We've been to Japan 6 or 7 times, China 6 or 7 times, our village in the Himalayas 15 or more times, and each time you collect diaries, letters, so on and so on, and they all get put along here and then gradually put into databases along with the films and other such things. I mentioned the desire to keep paper, and we'll see the effect of this in a minute, but this is actually quite a good place for the camera to look down at the barn from, and you can see the not so well from here, the jigsaw puzzles on the ceiling, which Sarah does, but you can see the sort of clutter, the productive clutter, like a kind of garage with all the bits and tools and all the memories and objects. One has to keep it fairly organised, otherwise you'd never find anything. But if you get it too organised and tidy, then it loses its creativity. This now is the sort of probably going to be the basis of my next project, which is to try and write, if we have the energy and time, a history of the British Empire seen through the family letters and papers and photographs and whatever of my family, because it's an interesting family and they kept a lot of the materials. So all around here are the archives of a family dating back 500 years, travelling all over the world, important in Jamaica, Burma, India and so on to a certain extent. And so this is a second work area, which I've just built up in the last few months, where I sit here and work on family archives. There are letters. I'm typing in my parents' letters to me when I was a little boy at school, because I didn't throw anything away, and because my mother and grandmother threw very little away, we have all their papers as well as going further back in time. And this is, I come up here because this is very, very quiet. Downstairs there's the internet, there's Sarah, there are other things. Here I'm almost in a kind of prison cell. I always remember that when I was studying Montesquieu was a very rich nobleman. He had a huge chateau, and he could have, with a beautiful library of which there are pictures, and he could have sat in his library. And in fact, Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws, a lot of it, sitting in that tiny little cramped space in the walls of his chateau, with a tiny window, and only a few feet round him. And I think he knew, and a lot of other people have known, that you actually need to be almost imprisoned away from too much data and so on. So here is a place certainly for a certain kind of work and thinking. What those who study the psychology of work say, you should have different places for different kinds of jobs. You shouldn't try and mix. That's why it's so difficult to work in a normal house, because if you try and mix the domestic environment and creative work, it's extremely difficult. You need a study, or you need a place to get away from, away to. You can create it, and some people I know, particularly women, who've overcome this. I remember Lisa Jardine explaining how her father was very good at, and she became good at, just working at the kitchen table with all the children rushing around. Very good concentration. I find that difficult, so this is a place where I can sit and work. Here beside me I have a computer with the database which Sarah and I have developed with computer colleagues, which has all our films, all our diaries and so on, gradually being put in, so that in the future I'll be able to be writing and then look at the photographs that were taken, or the films or the diaries of particular events in our lives, and bring all this together, something we want to do. So this is another setting. This whole barn and the books and everything you've seen so far are the formal side. This is in a sense the desk and its environs. But Max Weber said that while we work at our desks, it isn't at our desks really that we have our best ideas. You need to leave your desk, and so I now want to take you away from the desk to the area where I really think. This is the beginning of the orchard, and the beginning of what I call rather pretentiously my thinking path. That's what Darwin called it, the path he walked around every day. And it's based on Darwin's walk, sand walk, and also the philosopher's walk in Kyoto and other thinking paths. It's a place, I think another of my favourite Einstein quotations, that something like the legs are the wheels of creativity, or some such. Or a Latin quotation, solvita ambulando, it is solved by walking. It usually is solved by walking. So this is the beginning of the solution to many questions and problems. You come out of the barn with a question, and by the end of the walk you hopefully have a solution. On the way, though, and on other occasions, I may take a detour, which I'll take with you now. This is based on images of a Japanese tea house, and was built in the early 90s. We built it. It's got the special path you walk along through a bed of time, symbolically through time as well, along the dewy path. So you leave all the tensions and all the problems and all the data, walk out of time, and in fact that very walk, just from there to here, when this was being built, I was walking back and forth when this was being built, when I was writing a book on tea, and it was in this short walk that I began to realise the importance of tea and how it solved the problem of the origins of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Just walking back and forth, it has symbolically associational things. This is from the Outer Hebrides, where my parents lived. Shell sand from North Uist, a sort of rock and sand garden of the Japanese kind. This is the oak tree against which Alexander Pope rested when he was writing The Rape of the Lock, part of Milton's Mulberry Bush, and so on. I noticed that a lot of writers I admire, like Tocqueville, Alexander, David Hume, and all sorts of people, worked in very confined space. Adam Smith, for example, just had a little table like this, and John Maynard Keynes used to have put something on his knee and work in bed or on a sofa or whatever. This confines it and makes you work in a relaxed way, and this space here is very important for me over the last few years as a place where I start my thinking. If I've got to start a book or start an article, write something, the very first draft, I just find a pad of paper, put it here and look out at the garden, maybe go for a walk, come back, and then just write a very rough set of ideas without any particular thoughts in mind. Just let the pen flow across the paper. And that first draft, handwritten in absolute solitude and peace here, with no telephones and no one coming, means that your whole attention is based on the problem at hand. I then take that handwritten version, take it to the barn, refine it, improve it, change it, put in extra data, and so on and so on. But this first draft is extremely important. It's the most creative bit, and it needs absolute peace, quiet, and exclusion. So this, what we call the Morse House, named after Edward Morse, the expert on Japanese architecture, is the creative centre of the garden in many ways. Here, for instance, I'm just indexing these. I always carry these little books around with me. In my fieldwork in Nepal or here, I have one in my top pocket. And in these, as I'm walking around, I just jot down ideas, thoughts. If I'm sitting at a bus stop, I'll write down a draft or something, or things, because ideas come at any moment. Thomas Hobbes, the philosopher, used to carry a little pen and piece of paper and jot things down, and many people do that, because it's in those moments when you're not expecting them that good, interesting thoughts come, and then you open them up, and I'm indexing them at the moment and seeing if there's any thoughts I've missed. I've crossed through a lot of them because I've absorbed them, but that's a pile of them over the last couple of years there. And this is slightly more systematic books. I always carry a slightly bigger book like this in my briefcase, and these are early drafts of thoughts and articles and whatever. These are all, my daughter kindly gives me these kinds of things for Christmas, and so they're again plans and ideas, going on and on. Glossaries, conclusions of a book. This is parts of a book on terrorism, which has never got very far, but that's what it is. And I keep here at hand also inspirational things like poetry. This is T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets or Tennyson's poetry. So the thinking path really gets going just here. It's a very crooked path. It's based partly on Borges's idea of a garden with divided paths, and it's also what I call a memory garden. That is, as I walk round it, it triggers memories of people, events, occasions. For instance, a tree we planted the day that my dearly beloved adopted sister Dilmaya died in Nepal on the 7th of April. And we had planted this tree, so this is Dilmaya's tree, and a lot of the trees, my mother's ashes are under one which she planted, and so on. I won't go through them as we walk round, but when I take visitors round, I take them and explain each of the significances, because this is a garden which is, as much as my own work, a product of my life. When we came here, it was an empty field with some trees which were cut down there. So every plant you see, more or less, is here by in a constructed way, has either come up through our permission or has been planted by us. So the dozens of fruit trees and many other trees are all planted by us. So this is an expression of our lives, but it also has moulded me as I walk around it. So it starts here. This is just a nod in the direction of the other part of my life which I haven't developed at all, which is science. I work in the old Cavendish laboratory, and this is stones from the old Cavendish laboratory here. Darwin used to put down stones when he went round his walks, and I just keep a few stones there, partly in memory of Darwin, and from places that I've visited, like the great Chinese Emperor Kangxi Emperor's tomb. This is from his tomb. And 2 days ago I sent a hedgehog by some friends, and I'll just put that there. So, and this is the wire that comes into my room in social anthropology, along which the message establishing the presence of pulsar stars arrives. So this is a bit of science. So it just drifts on. This part of the wood is really to clean the mind, because there's so much foliage and so much going on and so many birds and memories here. Whatever it was I was worrying about or thinking about at the beginning is sifted out of my mind. It's a sort of cleansing process, and it reduces everything to more or less to emptiness. I often think, just standing here, of Marvell's famous poem on the garden, which ends, but the mind transcending these finds other lands and other seas, annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade. This is a green, you can have green thoughts in green shade here. As I say, Borges is dividing paths, so I could go this way, I could go this way. That's how creativity is. You're constantly, after the event, I've always been interested in this, when you read people's books, you think, oh well, at the beginning they knew where they were going. You don't know. It's like going on this path. You don't know whether you should go this way or that way, or how you should proceed. Afterwards, you can explain the voyage. As you're taking the voyage, you don't know where it's going. So walking around here is an adventure, as is all kinds of discovery. By this time, my mind has largely been combed clean of whatever it was I was thinking about. And this is the last moment when it finally becomes reduced to quietness. I often think of a line in a poem by W.B. Yeats, the mind like a long-legged fly, the mind like a long-legged fly moves upon silence. An avenue of ash here, which is like King's College Chapel roof, as I think of it. But it's very straight and very directed, and it's where, in a sense, all my wandering and relaxed thoughts begin to focus again. So as I walk down here, I start thinking again whatever it was that I was left. funnily enough, it's usually just after when I've started to concentrate on the question or the puzzle. It's usually just as I turn around this corner and start heading back that a way through, I mean, nearly always when you're in creative work, the solution is not dead ahead of you, it's somewhere to the side. And just going around this corner, I suddenly see an association, a connection. I see what I should do next. Often you come to a block and then you need to move around it or bring in something. I mean, most work on creativity shows that it's what Koester calls by association, connecting hitherto unconnected things, which is the definition of a Cambridge PhD, among other things. Connecting these things means that your conscious mind really can't do this very easily. You need something at a deeper level. And this sort of what I sometimes describe as letting the mind, stretching the mind through conscious active work at your desk and thinking and concentrating on the problem, then relaxing it like a rubber band, then concentrating, relaxing. That seems to, for me anyway, to work as a way of creative thought. And when I've relaxed, I've concentrated a bit, and then just going around this corner, I think of what I should do next. And underneath all these nut trees, hazelnut trees which we planted, again it's an enclosed, a sort of tunnel, and you're beginning to enter almost the subconscious, if you believe in such a thing, and move into the sort of parallel world that you need, which you inhabit as a creative, whatever you are, a writer or artist or whatever. Because you can't work on the surface, you have to go down into another level, and this almost becomes an enchanted path leading you into realms, or as Keats no doubt would say, into fairy lands forlorn. Stop off for a raspberry or two. One of the disadvantages of being a cameraman, missing the raspberries. I write about this garden in my letters to Lily in nearly the last chapter, about how gardens and children combine to give me more pleasure than almost anything in the world in different ways. And then last week, to celebrate my retirement, Sarah very kindly gave me a wonderful sundial. Made by my cousin's husband, Tim Chalk, who's a professional sundial maker and other things. And so we installed this last week. Based supposedly on a design by Jefferson, the great President of the United States, round the Earth's sphere pointing in the right direction, and you would tell the time from this. And having on it symbols of my life: wild roses, a salmon, a small hedgehog, and one of the many quotations from Einstein which I really like. Read one way, it's make things possible. Read in the way in which he supposedly wrote it is make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. And this is what this garden and my work is really about. All writing and creativity is about making things simpler, but not oversimplifying. All art has to lie to the extent that the camera and everything else has to lie, as Eisenstein put it. You take the complexity of the world, which is vast and impossible to capture, and you simplify it down to a level where it can be communicated and means more than buzzing confusion around us. But if you reduce that to something simple and then leave it there, some people leave it too complicated, some people oversimplify it, and the art is just getting that balance. And this little symbol represents that. And here's me, the hedgehog, delving into mysteries of the world beneath the surface of this world. So this is going to see me through the next few years, I hope. This is all, of course, just one corner of my creative world, because much of my life over the last 40 years has been lived in central Cambridge, either in King's College or in the Department of Anthropology. And it's the tension between those worlds which has produced valuable things in my life. So in the end, what you learn, and what is the central message of my life, is that life and work are not separable. The mind and the emotions are united. The attempt to try and limit ourselves to a mind and a body doesn't really work, and it's the interweaving of these that really makes for productivity and creativity. Of course, I'm enormously fortunate to have a wonderful wife, Sarah, who helps me in all this, and a lovely family and good students. So it rather reminds me of on which I'll end, a nice small event which Peter Burke, the historian, described to me. He said there's a certain village, perhaps shall we say, in Hungary, and in that village they say, this church is the centre of our village, this village is the centre of our province is the centre of, as it were, Hungary. Hungary is the centre of Europe. Europe is the centre of the world. So this church is the centre of the world. And I sort of adapt this and say King's College, Cambridge, and my home is the centre of the most exciting, lovely university I can imagine. I have the most delightful discipline of anthropology and history. And so I'm right at the centre of everything I want to be, and I've had a wonderful career. So thank you very much indeed, Alex, for filming this turning point in my life.